We've had a few, what I'll call great breaks in your career, right? Like,
yeah, getting married to her was one.
Yeah.
I'm Michael Sullivan. I'm the author of 3 different fantasy series and a science fiction novel.
I'm Robin Sullivan, sometimes known as the wife. I help Mike on the business side of his publishing, and I'm also his alpha reader, and I run the beta and gamma programs.
When I was younger, I got into writing because I had read The Lord of the Rings, which was really the first books that I ever actually loved. And when I got done reading those books, I went to the bookstore to find more books. At that time, there weren't a lot of imitators of Tolkien, so fantasy was not that large of a genre. So as a result, I ended up writing my own. The first book I ever wrote, I was about 13 when I wrote it, and it was essentially 2 thieves, one who was a fighter who was renowned from an ancient empire that is no longer in existence, and then his partner who was a young prince who was outlawed. And it wasn't until I came back to writing that I realized I just wanted to try and do something fun like fantasy, and I actually went back and pulled those old characters out and used those as kind of the foundation. So that was one thing I learned, was that I can reuse old stuff. For a very long time, I tried to get published, and I would send out my books, and I would get rejection letters, and just like, as cliche as it can be, I put them all up on my walls. All of my friends who I graduated high school with had started businesses, had gotten PhDs. They were doing so wonderfully, and I was exactly where I was when I left high school, and I realized I'm just chasing a dream that I'm never going to achieve, so I gave up. I don't play well with others, and I don't like bosses. But I started off as basically a graphic designer and kind of creative director for a very small firm, and that firm was not doing that well. So at that time, I realized that I could actually make my own and hang out my own shingle and work freelance.
At the time, I was doing software, and we were living in North Carolina, near the Research Triangle Park, and there were a lot of software companies. So I thought, well, there would really be a need for an advertising agency that understood technology. So I would go out and get the clients. Michael would produce the art for brochures and advertising and websites. And then I would help provide the technical aspect. I could take someone's business, learn what they did and how they did it, and then was able to write the marketing copy to get them to be very successful.
It's important to remember that she's a business genius, so that made it really easy, because all I had to do was sit and draw pretty pictures, and she made money off of it.
Mike came to me one day and he says, the advertising agency has been great, but I'm not as satisfied as I used to be. I would like to try something different. I said, okay, what would you like to try? He says, well, I tried that whole writing thing and I never got anywhere with it. I think I would like to return to that. And he says, but I have a condition. And I says, what? He says, well, I don't want to publish. It's just too painful. The rejections, I'm not going to get anywhere with it anyways. I just want to do it because it's something I want to do. It would just be fun for me. When I got to the 3rd book, I said, okay, I know you don't want to publish, but these really need to get out there. So that's what got us into self-publishing. We've had a few, what I'll call great breaks in your career, right? Like,
yeah, getting married to her was one. Finding Tim's another.
And getting Tim was the greatest break ever.
One of the things I learned through listening to Tim and through hearing how he stumbles sometimes on my sentences, and I'll realize that I wrote it wrong. I like to write in a way that's very natural for people to speak, because it's a lot easier to read that way. In listening to him, whenever you hear him stumble, I would say, oh, I did something wrong there. Oh, right, I have to move that clause over or something. That really improves the overall quality, and that came directly from working with a narrator.
For us, the book is finished when the audio is finished. We'll make changes to the book based off of what happens in studio. So there have been times when, Tim will be following along and he might insert an extra word or he might reverse 2 words or something. And the engineer in the studio will look at us and we say, just keep rolling. And then meanwhile, I'm over here on a computer literally changing the book because of the way that Tim said that particular line.
Tim would say something and she'd look over at me and I go, yes.
Yeah, and
it means change it in our copy. So this is my office, and here you have my collection of Inspirables. And this over here is a wonderful piece that a reader sent me, and they did a wonderful job putting this together. And this is a wonderful thing that someone did off of a seal that we usually put in pressings for books. I've never understood why people feel compelled to send me these wonderful things, but I certainly do appreciate it. This is a beautiful stained glass that Mike and Tammy Rice created, and they showed us how they made it, and it's just, they spent ridiculous amounts of hours. So this is another piece that a reader sent me, and they hand rubbed it to make it this way. It's not quite as old as Magna, as you can see here, but it is nevertheless oak, and it is a very old tree.
The first book you write, if you read it and you say, wow, this isn't very good, well, A, you're probably right, because it probably won't be any good. But B, if you work hard and you are looking at constant improvement, it can get better.
Most people think that if you can write in your native language and you've ever told a story, those two things accumulate to you being able to be an author, and this is not the case. I am still learning how to write, and I'm improving every day, and this is after 35 years of writing every day. Learning how to convey and communicate a story is really hard. It's all the little parts that you don't think about, because as a person, you can tell someone a story, but you don't put the description in. You don't put in the reactions of the characters. This is things that are alien to a person to tell, so you have to learn those things as a writer. Brandon Sanderson, he wrote 13 novels before he's got his first one published. I wrote 13 novels before I got my first one published. It takes that long just to learn the pacing, how to build characters, how to make it all come together, how to do all those little nuances. And after I got that first book published, I had a long way to go still.